After high school, I decided to move out of my parents' house. So I rented a small apartment on the other side of our big city, and I found a part-time job at a local coffee shop. This was my first job ever. I worked as a barista. Luckily, my coworkers were super friendly. One of them is Caleb. He didn't speak much, but he stared at me all the time. He also worked as a barista. One day when we were making coffee, I was telling him my concerns about college. I waited for his response, but he just stared at me for a whole minute before saying, "You have the best smell ever." I just laughed and walked away awkwardly. Since then, I started to notice how weird he is, so I tried to keep my distance. One day after a late night shift, I got to the parking lot, got inside my car, and reversed it. Suddenly, I hit something. My heart dropped. I rushed to see what had happened, and there I saw Caleb, lying on the ground holding his leg. I panicked and didn't know what to do, so I jumped in my car and drove home, leaving him on the ground. I was terrified by what I did. I didn't help him. The next day at work, I hoped that he wouldn't realize that I was the one who hit him. But Caleb looked at me with a smile on his face. I was confused. Then he came close to me and said, "It's okay, Milla. I know you were scared and terrified. That's why you didn't help me." My heart stopped. He knew. Then he continued, "I forgave you. I'm happy as long as you are safe. And I only got a few bruises. No biggie." I was shocked by Caleb's response. I asked him what he was doing there behind my car. He said he wanted to make sure I arrived safely because it was late at night. He was so polite, and it made me feel bad about how I treated him before. I stopped avoiding him, and we slowly became friends. But at the coffee shop, I started to notice there was a cute customer sitting in the same spot every day, and he never took his eyes off me. I blushed and smiled at him. However, he never approached me. After my shift, I was walking to my car and I heard footsteps behind me. When I looked, I saw a dark figure. I panicked and ran as fast as I could. I could hear him getting closer, but I just ran until I lost him. The next day when I arrived at work, I heard there was a big fight inside. When I walked in, I saw Caleb beating the cute customer I saw the other day. The manager came in and apologized to the guy and then told Caleb to take the day off. When I asked Caleb why he did it, he said that the guy was stalking me. I was confused. Was he the one who followed me last night? Caleb explained that he had been watching him since he noticed his weird behavior. When he heard him today on the phone saying he was going to find out where I live, he couldn't hold it in and he beat him. But I didn't expect that Caleb would go that far to protect me. From that day on, he insisted on walking me home and making sure that I got there safely. After he walked me home a couple of times, I decided to invite him inside. We sat and talked for hours. Then it happened. We kissed and slept cuddling each other. After that night, he would stay at my place, often watching movies or talking. I started college after 1 week, and what I saw there made my jaw literally drop. The same guy from the coffee shop. He was holding a bag. He looked at me, and I immediately turned my face and walked away. I decided not to tell Caleb since I was afraid that he might go after the guy again. I kept seeing the guy at college for the next few days. He didn't seem like a bad guy after seeing him closely, so I decided if he ever comes again to talk to me, I'll give him a chance to explain himself. And it happened. He smiled at me as usual. I didn't turn my face and smiled back at him, which encouraged him to approach me and start the conversation. He said, "Hi, Milla, I'm Dan. Well, I know your name from the tag on your apron." Then he continued, "I didn't mean to bother you or anything, but I like how you always look so calm and friendly. But your coworker is scary. He beat me for no reason." I told him that Caleb thought he was creeping on me and he did it to protect me. I assured him that Caleb is a good guy. After this conversation, I saw him daily at college, and I discovered that we had some mutual friends. I enjoyed his company, but didn't tell Caleb anything. After a month, the exams period started. I invited Dan and our mutual friends to have a study group at my place. This happened a couple of times. After each meeting, Dan was the last to leave. We sat together and chatted for a couple of hours. We flirted with each other, and we even kissed. I liked Dan, and also liked Caleb, and I wasn't ready to choose or to become intimate with one of them, so I decided to leave everything as it is. At work, I took a late-night shift since I was busy with college, and on my way to the car, I felt as if I'm being watched again. I texted Caleb and asked if he could come. I was so afraid to go home alone that night. He replied that he will be there in 10 minutes. And he came. Caleb got angry at me for leaving work late without telling him. He said, "Whenever you have a late shift, text me. I can't have you go home alone." Then he said that the guy that used to come to the shop may be the stalker. I couldn't tell him that Dan is actually a nice guy and we hung out together, so I ignored it. Caleb stayed at my place for 2 nights and insisted that I must text him whenever I work late shifts. After a couple of days, one of my coworkers named Liz came to my place. We sat and she suddenly said, "I didn't know that you smoke, Milla. The smell is so strong here." I told her that I don't smoke, and maybe the smell is coming from one of the neighbors. After Liz's remark, I started to notice many weird things happening at my apartment. Many of my things went missing and showed up after days. I thought it was caused by stress of the exams, so I brushed it off. One night, I heard a loud banging noise coming from the living room. I was so scared, but got out of bed and went there to see. I opened the main door, but there was nothing. I went back to my room and texted Caleb about what happened. He replied that I'm overthinking and maybe the noise came from one of the neighbors. I got upset by his text. I was hoping that he would come and stay over. So I decided to invite Dan. I sent him a message, but there was no reply. I tried to call him, but also he didn't pick up. I thought that it was weird since he always answers his phone, but maybe he didn't have battery left in his phone or something. I went to sleep that night. In the morning, I went to work. When I arrived there, one of my coworkers said, "Did Caleb tell you anything about why he quit work?" I was shocked Caleb quit. Why? He didn't tell me anything. I immediately texted him, but there was no reply. I spent the whole shift worried about him and called several times, but still no answer. I didn't know if he had friends outside the coffee shop. He never mentioned anyone. I decided to text Dan and tell him this, even though he hated Caleb. But surprisingly, still there was no reply from Dan too. What happened? Did the two of them just disappear? And at the same time? Why? I was upset by what happened. Liz saw how upset I was. And then she said she's going to stay at my place and we could watch some movies, have fun, and forget about the boys' drama. So we went home together and stayed up until a late hour. In the middle of the night, we heard the same loud banging noise. I looked at Liz and she was terrified too. We carefully got outside my room and went to check the house. But nothing was there. We also checked the hallways, but they were dead empty. We decided to sleep with the lights on and investigate in the morning. The next day, as I was taking the trash outside, I saw my neighbor. She was an old woman. I greeted her and she did the same and said, "Your boyfriend is a nice guy, but he always asks me how I'm doing when he gets out at noon." What? I froze. "What boyfriend?" I asked. She said, "Oh, the one with the dark hair. I always see him leaving the apartment at noon." I freaked out. I ran, terrified, to the apartment to see Liz. She looked confused. I shouted at her, "Someone has been breaking into my apartment for days." I quickly explained to her what the old lady had said, and we called the cops. When they arrived, I explained to them what the old lady said, and they searched the whole apartment and found nothing. I was shocked. How and who? As the police were still in the apartment, I noticed that the big painting in the living room was tilted. I reached to fix it, but to my horror, I saw a creak from the side. So I moved it a little, and I let out a loud scream. The police officers and Liz rushed to me, and when they saw, their jaws literally dropped. There was a huge hole in the wall. In that hole were a few clothes, bed sheets, and a bag. They searched the bag and found a wallet with an ID. To my shock, it was Caleb's ID. Everyone was shocked. The police then said that the person who was living in the wall must stay there for a long time, since there was a lot of cigarettes and empty food cans. Then they said they will make sure to arrest Caleb and take good care of this case, since it was very dangerous and no one knew his intentions. I was terrified. Caleb, the nice guy, was a psycho who lived in my wall. They asked us many questions about him. Turned out that we barely knew anything about him. When Liz mentioned to them the fight incident at the coffee shop was the first time Caleb got violent, they said they will check the tape and see if they can get anything from it. I decided to stay at Liz's apartment until they arrest him. That same day, I got a phone call from the police. They said that they watched the tape and saw something shocking. During the fight, they saw Dan taking something out of Caleb's pocket and they zoomed to see. It was his ID. I was terrified. Then the police said that Dan must be the one they're looking for, and he wanted to frame Caleb. After a couple of days, Caleb showed up. He said that he went to a nearby city to his sick grandma. She was on the verge of dying, and that's why he didn't have his phone with him, and apologized for the sudden disappearance. Caleb was shocked by what we told him about Dan. He said, "I knew it. That guy was psycho. He was watching you the whole time with the dirtiest look on his face." Caleb told me that he was protecting me the whole time. And when I hit him with the car, he said he was coming to talk to me, but I didn't see him. As for now, I go to a psychiatrist to recover from that traumatic experience. And I quit my job, and I'm waiting for the police to find Dan and arrest him. Like I was waking from a dream I couldn't remember. I didn't understand what was happening at first. I was in a white, sterile room, and there were shadowy figures all around me, slowly morphing from shadows into human shapes. My first thought was that this was another dream, a nightmare, except I didn't feel like I was asleep anymore. My brain was foggy, but through my haze, I realized that the people standing around me wore surgical scrubs and masks. I attempted to lift my head, but nothing happened. I opened my mouth to speak, but there was something in my throat and around my face. I began to panic. My body wanted to thrash wildly, but not a muscle moved. What had happened? Had I been kidnapped and forced to be a subject in some strange experiment? The figures around me were speaking, and I tried to make myself focus, but the terror was growing. The room was full of antiseptic smells and beeping machines. Then the shadowy figure closest to me said, "Scalpel, please." That's when I realized what was happening. I'd been brought in for surgery that morning to correct a congenital heart defect that was causing overcirculation in my body. I'd been terrified about the surgery for months, but it was a medical necessity. One of the last things my mother had said to me before the doctors took me back was, "Sarah, don't worry, you won't feel a thing." But I could feel everything. The cool air in the room, the pressure of the breathing tube in my mouth, the surgeon's hands as she swabbed an area of my chest. Even my eyes weren't under my control. Sometimes it felt like they were blinking rapidly. Sometimes they felt dry and scratchy, like I wasn't blinking at all. I kept trying to move any part of my body. Fingers, toes, nothing worked. The procedure had been explained to me ahead of time. They would give me a paralytic as part of the general anesthesia, so my body wouldn't be able to move reflexively on the operating table, but I'd be unconscious and wouldn't feel anything. But somehow, I had woken up. The paralytic had worked, but the anesthesia hadn't. I watched the surgeon come closer to me with a scalpel. I tried to open my mouth, but it was like every muscle in my body was made of lead. "Stop!" I tried with all my might to tell her. "Stop! I'm awake!" But there was nothing I could do but lie there, completely helpless. I felt a slight pressure on my chest, no pain at first. The blade of the scalpel was so thin, it barely felt like anything. And then I could feel a sharp pain in my chest. I was sure I was dying. I had never felt pain that excruciating in my life. The sides of my chest hurt, and every scream I wanted to let out was silent. Then the surgeon used the other surgical tools. Each one felt different, but they all hurt. The smell of the room was terrible. Actually, I felt more pressure and pain as they began to explore my internal organs. Well, it was less painful once they were touching inside my body, but the pressure, the sensation of my individual organs being moved was terrible. I was sure I was going to throw up. That's when some survival instinct kicked in. You can't throw up, I told myself. If you throw up, you'll choke and you'll die. I concentrated on staying calm. I tried to think about my friends, about school, about anything except what was happening to my body. But the sensation of the surgeon's hands as she touched my heart made it impossible to stay calm. It was like something out of a horror movie. I wanted to scream at them to stop. I wanted to scream for my mother. I wanted to scream and never stop screaming. And then I realized that part of the pressure that I felt in my chest wasn't just the surgeon's hands. It was the breathing tube, which was only giving me one breath every couple of minutes. It felt like there was a giant dog sitting on my open chest. I couldn't get air into my lungs, and I was afraid that even if I could breathe the way I wanted to, breathing would make the excruciating pain even worse. I had to make my body move. I had to find a way around the paralytic to let the doctors know that I was awake and feeling everything. I concentrated as hard as I could, but each time I felt close to moving, the surgeon's hands would shift inside me and a new wave of panic and pain would hit me. Finally, I managed to twitch my hand, at least I thought I did. At that point, I couldn't tell if I was just imagining it or not. Then I felt a hand on mine, and I almost passed out with relief. It was the assistant, and if she'd seen my hand move, then maybe she'd realized what was happening. The breathing tube gave me another breath. I drank that air gratefully, hoping my ordeal was about to be over. Then I realized that the assistant was holding my hand in place, not reassuring or helping me. I heard her say to the surgeon, "This one's a little jumpy," and they both laughed. I had never felt such overwhelming despair and terror in my whole life. I was going to die here, and I was going to die in terrible pain. I didn't realize it was about to get worse. One of my eyelids was forced down and taped in place. Half of my world went black, then the other half. Now I couldn't see the surgeons, couldn't tell when they were about to touch me or cut me. The machines around me started beeping, and I felt a terrible chill, like someone had dumped ice into my open chest. My body began to shiver, but I didn't know if the muscles were really working or if I was just imagining it. My lungs were slowly being crushed by lack of air, and I couldn't feel anything but fear. I silently said my last goodbyes to my friends and family. Then, something strange happened. It was like I left my body and floated up to the ceiling. My eyes were open again, and I could see myself down there on the table. Could see my open chest and the mess of organs inside me. The tape over my eyelids, that horrible breathing tube down my throat. I could see the surgeon and her assistant still joking with each other. Had I died? Was I on my way to the afterlife? I didn't feel scared anymore, and luckily I couldn't feel pain. But what hit me now was a flood of memories, like when people say your life flashes before your eyes as you're about to die. The first face I saw was my mom's. I remembered those awful few months leading up to the surgery. I had been so scared that the surgery wouldn't work, that I would die on the table or afterward from a heart complication. My anxiety had me terrible to be around. I was mean to everyone. I never did what was expected of me at school or at home, and nobody even tried to make me because they knew I was sick. My mom was the only person who pushed me, who made me do my homework and study for college admissions tests and do my chores, as though she truly believed I was going to have a long, full life. But there was no guarantee, and because of that fear, I took all of my anger out on her. By the time the day of the surgery rolled around, we were barely speaking to each other. But in the waiting room, when I'd been shaking with terror, she had looked at me and told me everything would be all right, that I wouldn't feel a thing, that she would see me on the other side. I'd wanted to tell her that I loved her, but I was too afraid and angry, irrationally angry, as though she was the one who was making me do this. The nurse had taken me back to the operating room before I could get the words out. Remembering that now, I knew that I had to live. I had to live so that I could tell her I loved her and that I was sorry. I looked down at my body lying on that table, and I concentrated with all my might. Move your hand, I told myself. You have to move your hand. It wasn't working. I saw the body on the table as though from a great distance. I could sort of remember what it felt like to struggle to breathe, to feel the scalpel ripping into my body, but all of that was slowly fading. It would be so easy to just keep floating. Then my hand twitched once, twice, 3 times. The machine started beeping again. Suddenly, I slammed back into my body on the table. The pain was back, the struggle to breathe, but I didn't care anymore. All that mattered was living through this. An assistant was removing my breathing tube. The beeping of the machines was a cacophony that hurt my head. I could hear people saying, "She's weak, we have to get her back under." They had figured it out. Someone was talking to me, saying my name, telling me to try to stay calm, that I would sleep in a moment. I was still terrified. What if the anesthesia didn't work again? Or what if I did go back to sleep, but I never woke up? Blackness edged my vision again, but this time, I let it take me. When I woke up again, everything was fuzzy. It took me a moment to realize where I was, and when I did, I panicked, thrashing on the bed, afraid that I was still being cut into. A nurse came and calmed me down, and then a surgeon came in. I was awake, I told her. I felt everything. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said how sorry she was that this happened to me. She said it was very, very rare and that I was one of the unlucky ones. I didn't know what else to say. In some ways, I did feel like one of the unlucky ones, but at the same time, I was incredibly lucky to have survived. Tears welled in my eyes, then started sliding down my cheeks. I felt so confused and afraid until a face appeared in the doorway. The one face that I desperately wanted to see.
My mom. She hurried to my bedside and asked me what had happened. I just held onto her and told her that I loved her and was sorry for all the times that I'd hurt her. She said it was okay, that none of that mattered, that she loved me so much. Then I took a deep breath and started to tell her what I experienced. The recovery from the surgery was long, but I'm doing okay now. I still have PTSD from my ordeal. Some nights I wake up in a panic, thinking I can't move, that I'm back on the operating table with a scalpel about to slice me open. Sometimes my body won't move or my voice won't work, even though I'm not under the influence of a paralytic. It's like the memories are so strong, they can freeze up my body again. But my mom has been wonderful through it all, helping me through it. I realize now how grateful I should have been for her all along. After all, it was her strength that gave me the strength to survive.